Joining me from Washington is an old friend, William Cohen, former Republican U.S. Senator of Maine. He served as Secretary of Defense during the Clinton administration and currently is Chairman and CEO of the Cohen Group. William, good talking with you again. Concerning the campaign of 2016, as a veteran politician, what the heck is going on?
Well, Larry, it's good to be with you. Maybe your viewers don't know that you and I go back to the time when you were first doing radio.
Yep.
You had me and Jack Kemp on many, many years ago.
Many years ago, the late Jack Kemp.
It's good to be with you.
I wonder what Kemp would think of this today.
I wish we had a Jack Kemp available today. I think it's very discouraging to see the level of discourse drop down to the level it has. And it's discouraging because I want to see the Republican debate elevate our spirits rather than to drive them down. And I think any candidate has to be careful in terms of what he or she says, because it now goes globally. And people make judgments upon us depending upon what we say and how we say it. And so I think the campaign to date has not been exactly elevated. And I think in particular the reference to waterboarding, which I believe to be a form of torture. And anyone who doesn't think that, I think, should volunteer to be waterboarded. But beyond that, to say that we want to extend what our military can do in terms of interrogating, enhanced interrogation of prisoners, I think we have to be really careful, because what we're doing is we're starting to mirror what is being done to the Americans and to our supporters, which is barbaric, it's horrific, it's decadent, and I don't want to see us resort to the same kind of tactics in order to say that we're tough. I think we can be tough, but we need to maintain our high standards of how our military shall conduct themselves in a time of certainly peace, but also in a time of war.
How can we be better if we do what the enemy does?
If we simply respond and reciprocate in kind, it reduces us to their level. I think that Mr. Trump is correct to point out the horrific things that ISIL and the Taliban do, burning people alive, drowning them in cages, beheading them. What I don't want to see us do is to try to replicate how tough they are and vicious they are by saying we should do the same, because that really deprives the United States of what we prize most, that we set ourselves apart in terms of demanding very high standards, that we swear an oath not to a president, but to the Constitution. We take an oath that we will abide by the rule of law. And frankly, I don't want to see us amend the law or redefine it in a way that allows us to appeal to the baser instincts of our nature. I want to keep our ideals what we promote, and not our capacity to inflict pain in order to extract information out of any individual.
At first, he advocated waterboarding, killing families of terrorists. And then after warnings from people like you and the former CIA chief, Michael Hayden, that this would violate international law, he backed off. And then he said he wouldn't order the U.S. military to do anything illegal. Now he says he wants the laws increased so that the United States can play the same game.
Well,
what is that?
Well, I think this needs more examination. That's why I think these debates are important. The candidates, not just Mr. Trump, but all of the candidates, to explain exactly what they mean. When Mr. Trump says that I want to expand the ability to deal with terrorists, does that mean he wants to pull fingers, chop fingers off, nails taken out? Does he want to apply shock treatment to certain parts of the anatomy? Is that something that the United States American people would be proud of, that we would do such a thing? We have standards that we insist upon. In fact, our military, we even prosecute our men and women who violate those standards. Now, the answer is not to lower the standards so they can't be prosecuted, but to say, no, we demand a very high standard of conduct. We don't do what other people do. We will not descend into the law of the jungle. We will try to be as civil as we can, even in a time of war. Now, that may strike some as being naive, but it's what has separated us from the barbarians, from the brutality that we see in so many other parts of the world. We're different. We want to remain different and not descend into the lower depths of humanity.
And the argument at Nuremberg that we were only doing what we were ordered to do didn't hold water.
It didn't, and it shouldn't. This is a thing. As a matter of fact, it's what the Holocaust Museum does in Washington. Brings members of police departments and the military in to see exactly what can happen when you refuse to abide by the rule of law and you then revert to the law of rule, where one individual or a group of individuals take the law and manipulate it and twist it in a way that achieves a goal which is beneath us. And I think Mr. Trump obviously is following the reaction to his statements, and I think that we have to continue to make sure we understand how far he'd like to go. Is it, again, chopping hands, pulling fingernails, chopping heads, burning people? No. What is it we want to do other than waterboarding? And again, I say if you think that waterboarding is not torture, I think everybody should volunteer to come forward and try it. I think it is torture. I think it is the kind of treatment that my friend John McCain went through when he was beaten almost every day during his 5+ years as a prisoner of war. That's something that we really don't want to do, and I hope Mr. Trump will back away from it and say that we'll abide by the rule of law as it exists.
Your group, the Cohen group, you deal internationally all the time. What's the international thinking about Trump?
Well, it goes beyond Mr. Trump. The international community as such is worried about the United States. They're worried about what role do we see for ourselves in this 21st century. And frankly, we haven't decided that here at home. On the one hand, there are those who are more libertarian, who would like to see us revert to the United States and become involved in nation building at home. There are those who still remain, quote, internationalists, who want us deeply engaged in international affairs. There are some on the left who also want us to come home and deal with issues at home rather than trying to maintain our position in the world. And so we have yet to decide exactly what role the United States should play in a world that is one of increasing disorder, increasing chaos, increasing rule of the authoritarians, namely where people can occupy positions of power and don't abide by the rule of law and don't recognize it, can take possession of territory like the Russians have in Crimea, like Russia is now doing in backing Assad in Syria, Russian boots on the ground, tanks on the ground, aircraft in the air. And we're sitting back and watching this saying, well, that's their problem. I think we have to be concerned when you see 250,000 people who have died, 12 million people who are now homeless, trying to move into Europe. And I was just most recently with our Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, he was at a conference in Munich, and he said that the Russians are actually weaponizing the refugees. In other words, the Russians are bombing civilian areas in order to drive those people living innocently in those areas out of Syria and push them into Europe. That has the effect of destabilizing Europe. So we have a role to play, and we have to decide in the very near future what that role is going to be. And right now we're divided. So the other countries look at us and they say, we're not so sure that we can count on the United States. We don't know what your position is, and we don't know how long it will be your position. So we have to have coherency and continuity. And right now we're neither coherent nor are we continuous in the application of that philosophy.
Is there any candidate you're supporting?
No, I am waiting to see how it all unfolds. There are a number of people that I like. John Kasich. I think that Rubio would, given time, could develop. I did like Governor Bush, but that was not the choice. I like people who have had experience and who know how government does operate. I understand the anger and the anxiety about people saying you haven't done so well here, and that we don't want someone who's had their hands on the machinery of government. But frankly, the American people are just as much to blame for falling for the notion that people promise them things that we're not willing to pay for. We have, and I think Mr. Trump is correct in pointing this out, we have a $19 trillion national debt. And it's increasing every year at $500 billion. And what we are doing is we are beggaring our children. We are borrowing from our children to pay for the conveniences we want to enjoy now. That's just the opposite of what happened to me as a young child when my parents would borrow to help me. Now we're borrowing to help ourselves and borrowing from them. So I think there's some real legitimate issues that are being raised, but I think we have to take care. Words are important. Words are, they're the clothing we give to naked thoughts, to quote, paraphrase Justice Holmes. So we have to be very careful what we say because it reflects what we're thinking. And if that thinking is something that is completely antithetical to the values we have professed and held up to the world as being our unique values, then we will fall from a state of admiration.
What's the greatest international threat that'll face the next president?
I think the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. I think we're seeing the proliferation of nuclear capability, cyber terrorism, those threats. I think global warming is a national security threat. So there are a lot of threats out there, and we have to try to prioritize them. But I think one thing we have to do is try to promote stability in regions which are unstable. The threat of mass migration. If the climate changes and drought extends to areas, it's going to drive people into areas that have water. If you have places, North Korea is another major threat we have to face. So there are many, many threats, but what we have to have is a coherent philosophy and one that we can rally other countries around to say, this is the way the world should be governed. And there's a real choice coming up. We can either say that we believe that democracy is the best form of government on the planet, or we'll have to contend with other countries who say, no, authoritarianism works for us. We believe in the law of the rulers and not the rule of law. So there's a contest underway in which strong leadership is admired by some countries and the rule of law is admired by others. It's going to be a big issue facing all of us.
We're going to have you back again soon. It's great talking to you. You're a great American, Bill.
Well, thanks very much, Larry. It's great. I wish I could see you, but it's great to hear you.
William Cohen, Chairman and CEO of the Cohen Group.